Picture this. It's Monday morning. You have 47 unread emails. Your phone has been buzzing since 6 a.m. You have 3 deadlines today. Your boss just added a meeting at noon. Your kids need to be picked up at 3. You haven't eaten breakfast. You slept 5 hours. You have a headache that started yesterday and never fully left. You sit down at your desk, open your laptop, look at the screen, and nothing happens. Nothing like you're relaxed. Nothing like your brain just stopped. You're staring at the screen and you cannot form a single coherent thought. You know you need to start somewhere. You know there are things to do, urgent things, important things, but your brain is just gone. You close the laptop, open it again, stare at it, close it, get up, sit down, pick up your phone, put it down, stand up again, for no reason. You're not lazy, you're not stupid, you're not having a breakdown. Your brain just hit its limit. And what happens next is one of the most misunderstood and underestimated things the human brain can do. Oh, hey there. Welcome back. I'm your host. Dead, obviously. No cortisol, no cognitive load, maximum clarity on exactly what happens when living human brains stop cooperating. Today we're talking about cognitive overload. The moment when your brain gets more information, more demands, more decisions, more stress than it can actually process. And instead of working harder, it does the opposite. It shuts down, fragments, stops functioning the way it's supposed to. This isn't weakness. This isn't a character flaw. This is your brain doing exactly what any overloaded system does when you push it past its limits. The question is, what exactly is happening inside your skull when it happens? And why does it feel so much worse than just being tired? Let's find out what it actually feels like when your brain gets completely overwhelmed. So what actually is cognitive overload? And why does your brain, the most sophisticated information processing system ever created, just stop working when you need it most? Here's the simple version. Your prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for everything that makes you human. Decision-making, planning, problem-solving, impulse control, working memory. The ability to hold multiple pieces of information in your mind simultaneously and manipulate them. It's the CEO of your brain. The part that separates complex rational thought from basic animal reaction. And it has a limit. Working memory, the mental workspace where your prefrontal cortex does its processing, can hold approximately 4 chunks of information simultaneously. 4, not 40, not 400. 4. This was established by cognitive psychologist George Miller in 1956 and refined by Nelson Cowan in 2001. 4 chunks, that's what you're working with. When you exceed that limit, when you try to hold more than your working memory can handle while simultaneously making decisions and managing emotional stress and processing new information, your prefrontal cortex doesn't just slow down. It starts making errors, missing things, dropping information, losing the thread of complex tasks. And here's what makes modern life particularly cruel for your brain. Your prefrontal cortex evolved in an environment where the average person made approximately 70 decisions per day. Today, the average person makes approximately 35,000 decisions per day. From what to eat, to how to respond to an email, to whether that notification is important, to what route to take, to how to phrase that message. 35,000 decisions, with hardware designed for 70. Every single decision, no matter how small, costs cognitive resources. Choosing what to have for breakfast costs the same type of mental energy as choosing whether to accept a job offer. The brain doesn't distinguish, it just spends the resource. And when the resource runs out, you get what researchers call decision fatigue. And decision fatigue is just the beginning. All right, let's go stage by stage, because cognitive overload doesn't happen all at once. It builds, and each stage feels different. Stage 1. Early overload. The first warning signs. You've been running at high capacity for a few hours, maybe all morning, maybe all week. Your working memory is full. Your prefrontal cortex is working at maximum capacity. You're still functional, but the cracks are starting to show. You read an email and immediately forget what it said. You walk into a room and can't remember why. You start a sentence and lose the end of it midway through. You misplace things. Keys. Phone. Where you put that document you were just looking at. This isn't age. This isn't early dementia. This is your working memory running out of buffer space and starting to drop items. Like a computer with too many tabs open, it's starting to slow down, starting to glitch. You feel slightly irritable. Small things that normally wouldn't bother you are bothering you. Someone chewing too loudly, a notification sound, a minor inconvenience. Your emotional regulation also runs through the prefrontal cortex, and it's currently very busy elsewhere. So your ability to manage your emotional reactions to small irritants has degraded. You're not in a bad mood. Your brain's emotional management system is running on low resources. Stage 2. Active overload. The system starts fragmenting. More inputs keep coming. More demands. More decisions. More information. And your brain is trying to process all of it with a system that's already running at capacity. Here's what happens physiologically. Your brain starts releasing cortisol, not the small baseline amounts that help you focus, significant amounts. Stress response cortisol. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis activates. Your body is treating cognitive overload like a physical threat, because to your nervous system, overwhelming demands are a threat. The mechanism doesn't distinguish between a tiger chasing you and 47 unread emails. Cortisol at moderate levels actually helps cognition. It sharpens focus, improves memory consolidation. This is why some stress improves performance. But at high levels, high sustained cortisol does the opposite. It actively impairs prefrontal cortex function. It reduces the density of connections between neurons in the prefrontal cortex. It shrinks the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for forming new memories, over time. And it redirects cognitive resources away from complex rational thinking toward more primitive threat response systems. Your brain is literally pulling resources away from the part of you that thinks clearly and redirecting them toward the part of you that just wants to survive. Which is why, under high cognitive load and stress, you start making worse decisions. Not because you're trying less, because your brain has physically redistributed the resources you use to make good decisions. You feel it as difficulty concentrating, thoughts that won't connect, starting tasks and stopping, jumping between things without completing any of them, the inability to prioritize. Everything feels equally urgent and equally impossible. Stage 3. Peak overload. The system crash. This is the moment you sat down at your desk and your brain just stopped. This is what cognitive researchers call cognitive shutdown, or mental fatigue-induced performance collapse. Your prefrontal cortex is so overwhelmed, so depleted of the neurochemical resources it needs to function, that it essentially stops being able to execute complex cognitive tasks. Not partially, completely. You can't decide what to do first because the part of your brain that makes decisions is offline. You can't form a plan because planning requires holding multiple steps in working memory simultaneously. And your working memory is full of undone tasks and unread messages and competing demands. Here's what's happening at the neurochemical level. Your prefrontal cortex runs primarily on norepinephrine and dopamine. These neurotransmitters are released in optimal amounts during moderate stress and activate the neural connections that allow complex thinking. But under extreme or sustained stress, these same neurotransmitters are released in excessive amounts, and at excessive levels they don't enhance prefrontal function. They shut it down completely. The neurons in your prefrontal cortex literally stop firing in the coordinated patterns required for complex thought. They become uncoordinated, random. The cognitive architecture needed for planning, decision-making, and focused attention collapses. Simultaneously, your amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, has become hyperactive. It's receiving all the stress signals, all the cortisol, all the norepinephrine, and it's amplifying them. Every small thing feels threatening. Every task feels impossible. Every demand feels catastrophic. This is why cognitive overload often feels like anxiety, even when there's nothing objectively catastrophic happening. Your amygdala is running hot, and your prefrontal cortex is too depleted to regulate it. The emotional accelerator is pressed to the floor, and the brakes have given out. You feel it as a specific kind of paralysis. Not tired exactly, not sad exactly. More like a complete inability to start anything. Sitting in front of work you need to do, knowing you need to do it, completely unable to begin. Some people cry. Not because anything is particularly sad, just because that's what happens when your emotional regulation system runs out of resources. The feelings that were being managed flood out because there's nothing left to manage them with. Some people feel a strange calm, detached, like watching their own overwhelmed state from outside. This is dissociation, a protective mechanism where your brain essentially buffers itself from a situation it can't process. Some people get angry, at small things, at nothing, pure frustration that has nowhere to go. Stage 4, the aftermath. When your brain tries to recover, if you manage to step away, to stop the inputs, to give your brain a break, the recovery process is slower than you'd think. Your cortisol levels take time to come down, 20 to 30 minutes of genuine rest to start dropping, an hour or more to return to baseline. During this time, your prefrontal cortex is slowly restoring its neurochemical balance, slowly rebuilding the capacity for complex thought. But here's the cruel part. During the recovery period, your brain's error rate is still elevated. You're still making worse decisions than normal, still more emotionally reactive, still less able to manage complexity. You feel slightly better than you did at peak overload, but you're not back to baseline, not even close. And if you go straight back into the demands before your brain has recovered, you hit the next wave of overload from a lower starting point. Each cycle leaves you slightly more depleted than the last. This is how burnout builds. Not from one catastrophic event, from repeated cycles of overload and incomplete recovery. So what does this actually feel like from the inside? The most consistent thing people describe about cognitive overload is the gap between knowing and being able to. You know what you need to do. You know the tasks exist. You know they're important, but the bridge between knowing and doing has collapsed. It's not like being confused. You understand the situation completely. It's more like being frozen, aware, present, unable to move. People describe it as being behind glass, watching the world and your responsibilities through a barrier you can't get through. Others describe it as trying to run in water, all the effort, almost no movement. The emotional experience is often dominated by shame. You know you should be able to function. You can see what needs to be done, and you can't do it. And in a culture that treats productivity as a moral virtue, the inability to function feels like a personal failure rather than a physiological limit. But it isn't a personal failure. It's a system reaching its capacity. The same way a computer doesn't fail morally when it runs out of RAM. Your brain is a biological organ with biological limits, and you just hit them. Some people describe a specific physical sensation alongside the cognitive collapse, a heaviness behind the eyes, a pressure across the forehead. Not quite a headache, more like a fullness. That's your prefrontal cortex running hot. Real metabolic activity, real physical sensation. Others describe an inability to feel anything clearly. Not numb exactly, more like everything is slightly blurred. Emotions present, but vague, like a radio signal losing its frequency. Here's where the numbers get serious. Burnout, the clinical syndrome that results from chronic cognitive and emotional overload, was officially recognized as a medical condition by the World Health Organization in 2019. It affects an estimated 67% of all workers at some point. 67%. 2 in 3 people. Workplace stress costs the U.S. economy approximately $300 billion per year in lost productivity, healthcare costs, and absenteeism. $300 billion. From brains that hit their limit and stopped working correctly, mental health conditions related to stress and overload, including anxiety disorders, depression, and burnout syndrome, affect approximately 1 billion people worldwide. 1 billion, the most common health conditions on the planet, more prevalent than heart disease, more prevalent than diabetes. And here's the number that should change how you think about your own limits. Research by Roy Baumeister at Florida State University found that decision-making quality degrades measurably after approximately 3 hours of sustained cognitive effort. 3 hours. After that, your brain is making worse decisions whether you know it or not, whether you feel tired or not. You don't feel your prefrontal cortex depleting the way you feel your legs getting tired. The feedback mechanism is much weaker, which is why so many people push far past their cognitive limits without realizing they've passed them. They keep going, keep deciding, keep processing, while the quality of their thinking has been compromised for hours. So there you have it, cognitive overload. The moment your brain's most sophisticated system hits its biological limit and stops cooperating. Not weakness, not failure, physiology. Here's the thing though, understanding what's happening doesn't make it easier in the moment, but it does change what you do about it. Your brain needs actual recovery, not checking your phone while watching TV, not passive scrolling. Actual cognitive rest, walking without podcasts, sitting without screens, sleep that isn't shortened. These aren't luxuries, they're maintenance. The same way you can't run an engine without oil changes, you can't run a brain without genuine downtime. And the decisions you make when your prefrontal cortex is depleted, the emails you send at the end of a brutal day, the arguments you have when you're overwhelmed, the choices you make when you're running on empty. These are not your best thinking. They're your brain's exhausted approximations of thinking. Treat them accordingly. Hit subscribe if you want more videos about the most interesting things your brain does when it's pushed past what it was built for. I've got plenty of material. I'm dead. I've got nothing but time and an extremely detailed understanding of what happens when humans stop functioning correctly. And hey, if you're reading this at the end of a long day and nothing is making sense and you can't figure out where to start, close the laptop. Go to sleep. Your prefrontal cortex will be there in the morning. It just needs to reboot. Trust me on that one. You said, Napishi promti stamlinum dla flove.